Welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 27 of The Kill File. I would like to shout out a few people for a few different things that mean a lot to me. Someone who has helped me get my social media stuff on track and has checked in to ask how things are going with the podcast. I have to shout out my girl Casey and say thank you so much for being so wonderful. Also, you guys, I was at a family get-together over the holidays and I met someone special who, after she figured out who I was, said that she was wondering why my voice was so familiar, and she had listened to a few of my episodes and said she is going to continue to be a listener. Olivia girl, you made my whole week with that comment, and it was a blast meeting you. One other thing before we jump in today's episode is just to say thank you guys so much for commenting, sharing, posting, whatever about The Kill File on your socials or anyone that you have shared the podcast with. You guys have no idea what it means to me, and I know that I say this a lot, but I need you guys to know that I mean it. I am so grateful for all of my listeners and allowing me to share these true stories with you guys each week and coming back every week again to listen. I am forever grateful, and I'm excited to see where this takes us. And as we continue to hopefully grow and get bigger and better, you guys will be my OGs, and you will always be the ones who listened and were a part of the Kill File community before anyone else. So thank you for all that you guys do to help me out. I appreciate you so much. Okay, today's episode is going to cover a case of a wretched man named Peter Sutcliffe. This is going to be a multiple-parter. I haven't settled yet on whether it's going to be 3, possibly 4 parts. Because in this case, we are going to go over in detail the murders of 13 women and another 10 that survived him, this abomination of a human being. This is going to be a deep dive into those accounts, and for this, we are headed across the pond, as he is an English serial killer known as the Yorkshire Ripper. I know I've done episodes before in England and called it Yorkshire, but now I'm aware that it's Yorkshire, and to my listeners over in that neck of the woods, sorry about that. If it was like nails on a chalkboard for you, I'm learning, I promise. Trigger warnings for today are going to be brutal murder, body mutilation, rape, very descriptive attacks, also on a minor as well as the murder of a minor. This one's going to be gnarly. If it's not for you, I understand, and we'll hopefully see you next Monday for the next episode. For those of us who have stayed, I am going to give this episode a blanket warning for brutality and warn you that you are going to want to punch this motherfucker in the face for the way that he callously describes his crimes. Oh, it's a good story, but it is a bit heavy, so be prepared. Here we go. Peter Sutcliffe was born on June 2nd, 1946 in Bingley, West Yorkshire, England, to parents John and Kathleen Sutcliffe. Peter was said to have 3 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers. He was the oldest in his family, which was said to be that of a working class, and the family practiced Catholicism. Peter, as a teenager, was described as being somewhat of a loner and was also said to be a voyeuristic person. Now, voyeuristic, in case anyone doesn't know, because I remember having to look this up a while back, because I didn't know what it meant, it's defined as basically gaining or relating to sexual pleasure that someone would get from watching others when they are either naked or engaging in sexual activity. So, it's a term for someone who likes to watch other people have sex or be naked, which I don't feel like that's uncommon or bad necessarily. I'm not here to kink shame anyone, but if it's non-consensual voyeurism, that's when we have a problem. Peter was said to have left school around the age of 15, and this is when he would have several different jobs, including working at a mill and a factory. He would go on to become a gravedigger in the year of 1964, which would make him about 18 years old, and being a gravedigger would lead him to having a job as a part-time worker at a local morgue. Peter was known for bragging to his friends about the fact that he would rob the bodies that were at the morgue, which is just so shitty. Leave dead people alone, alright? They don't deserve to have their belongings stolen from some little shit at the morgue. From November of 1971 until around April of 1973, Peter would work at a packaging line at a local factory. In 1976, he would go on to become a truck driver, which really bums me out, because truck drivers are wonderful and hardworking, and I don't like to think of this little dickhead giving them a bad name. I can actually speak for all truck drivers, I believe, when I say I don't think that they claim this man as one of their own. While we're on the subject of truck drivers, I just have to say a few things. Personally, I know many truck drivers in my life. First off, I've heard so many true crime cases where someone is running from their attacker, sometimes completely naked, and in pure terror, and a truck driver will pull over to help the poor victim, or call the police for them, or even take them to the police when it's needed. I have to say that we love a good truck driver, and the ones who would stop to do this for another human being, you are amazing and wonderful, and thank you for looking out for us on the road. Secondly, I know that so many of us get annoyed at trucks on the interstate and when they have to run a red light or turn or make a huge turn or whatever, but let me tell you something, driving a big-ass truck like that is fucking hard. Anyone out there who hasn't driven a semi-truck or even been in one, I gotta tell you that we have no idea how hard and scary it is to drive one of these. And I hope that you will have just a little more patience or understanding when you're on the road with trucks. Obviously, there's always bad apples out there, and I've also seen some truck drivers that are just straight up dicks. But let me tell you that not only do many truck drivers cap out at a certain speed, so when they get in the left lane to go around another truck, even if it's frustrating for you as a driver, try to understand that they are just doing their best and that they don't want to hold up any traffic. They just can't go any faster than they are, and they gotta make lane switches sometimes. So they usually aren't doing anything to be a dick to you. The trucks really just take a long time to get going to speed, so it's not the driver's fault. Believe me, they don't want to piss anybody else off. So the next time that you cut off a semi-truck and make them slam on their brakes, I hope that you'll try to remember that not only do many trucks have annoying beep when their brakes are hit hard, it also switches on a camera for a lot of the truck drivers to make sure that they're not doing anything wrong. And so many of our truck drivers are just hardworking people trying to make a living for their families. That job is hard. I could not do it. I couldn't sit there and drive for hours and hours on end, and without them, we wouldn't eat fast food, drink soda, get stuff at the store, get our mail, or even our Amazon packages. Shout out to truck drivers because the kill file loves you and has your backs. I hope that you will take the time to thank a driver today. They are some of the hardest working people I know. Anyways, as Peter was working for a driving job, after 1 year at this company, he would actually end up being fired for stealing tires. He wouldn't be able to find another job until October of 1976, where he became a quote-unquote trusted employee. Peter would remain at this job during his killing spree, unfortunately. In August of 1974, Peter had married a woman named Sonia Zerma, and unfortunately, the couple would go on to experience multiple miscarriages. The couple would then be told that they would not be able to have children. I myself have suffered a miscarriage before I had my oldest, and I know that many, many women have, and I can tell you that it's absolutely heartbreaking. I cannot imagine being told that you cannot have children after you have tried so hard and had so much heartbreak. If being a parent is something that you want or have always wanted, and then you have to find out that you can't, in at least like a biological sense, it would be world-shattering, I'm sure. Poor Sonia at this point. And to anyone else out there who has suffered this same story, I am so very sorry for what you have gone or are going through, as I know that miscarriages are so hard and you are not alone in your grief. I hope you find happiness. So after this, I'm sure devastating news, Sonia would go back to training to become a teacher. It was said that at one point Sonia would go on to have an affair. However, the couple was able to remain together. In 1977, the couple would buy a house, being able to use Sonia's teacher income in Heaton, Bradford, as this would be where they lived until Peter would be caught. Heaton is said to be a ward that's inside the Bradford Metropolitan District Council in West Yorkshire, England. Ward, I came to learn, is the term for parts of a town or city. During the late 1960s, Peter Sutcliffe would go on to attack numerous women with violence. He was said to usually target sex workers in the Manchester and Yorkshire area. He was known to physically assault his victims with a hammer, and he would also mutilate these poor women with a sharpened screwdriver or knife. Awful. So, although this case is already going to be very long because of the details that we're going to be able to get into, I feel that I must also include the survivors of the Yorkshire Ripper as well. I started doing research and found a ton on the murder victims, but then I was able to find information about one survivor that we're going to talk about later named Marcella. And once I was able to find information on her, I was opened up to a whole wealth of information on a website that I will link in the transcripts. This website delves into the survivors of the Yorkshire Ripper as well, and I feel like these women deserve to have their story told and not just left out because Peter failed to murder these women. The women who survived are absolute badasses, and I want to share their experiences as well, so I'm going to include their stories here too. Some may be more brief than others due to just the sheer size of this case, but I do want to include them out of respect and admiration for their ability to survive. The first survivor of Peter Sutcliffe's I think is so important because it really shows some context of his pathology. We don't know the name of this victim, which is absolutely all right, but we do know some of her story from Peter's confessions. So, there was a night when Peter confronted Sonia. Remember that she had had that affair at some point, so maybe this was during that affair. She was just his girlfriend at the time, and she was with what was reported to be an Italian ice cream salesman one evening when Peter would confront her. Sonia refused to give Peter any answers when he confronted her, and apparently she didn't even tell him if they were broken up or not. After this confrontation, it was said that Peter was wanting to get revenge on his girlfriend's actions of stepping out on him by seeking out a sex worker. He was apparently feeling heartbroken and betrayed as he drove past the Royal Standard pub, and at a nearby gas station, he saw a sex worker who seemed to be waiting for clients to show up. As he approached this woman, he agreed on a price of £5, when Peter would admit that he ended up changing his mind at some point. Peter would admit that while they were on their way to her place, he realized that he didn't even want to have sex with this woman. He said she was, quote, coarse and vulgar. He said right before they arrived, he came to the realization that this is not what he wanted. He stated that before he got out of the vehicle, he was already trying to get out of the situation, but was quoted saying that he felt stupid in that moment. Peter claimed to have already paid her £10, to which the woman said that she would give him change. He stated that as they went inside her home, he noticed a large dog in the front of a fire that had been going downstairs as the pair started to head up the stairs. He remembered feeling disgusted with himself and her, and he thought that the whole thing was just terrible. He further got to the point where he was unzipping her dress for her when he admitted that this was not what he wanted and told her that she could still keep the money, but she could just give him his change. The woman then told him that he would need to drive her back to where she was picked up to get the change. And apparently there were some men working where she was waiting, and these men would go on to be who, quote-unquote, protected her. Peter then went on to say that he drove the woman back to the garage where he had picked her up, and that he felt that he just wanted to get out of this situation altogether. This is why we should think through our decisions instead of making them off of our emotions, which I know is easier said than done. After Peter took the woman back to her workplace, she went inside, but she never came back out. And after waiting a long time for her, he said that one of the men who worked there came out and banged on the roof of his car, seemingly telling him to get the hell out of there. But Peter refused to move. I would have driven away so fast. What a dumbass. Apparently, the man told Peter that it wouldn't be smart to get out of the car and that he should just leave. Peter then said that he would have tried to fight the man, but that the man had been holding a wrench in a, quote, menacing sort of way. He then saw the woman come back out with another huge man, and the woman and man walked off laughing. Peter said in that moment he felt stupid and ended up driving away, boiling with anger, feeling embarrassed and humiliated. This is when Peter said that he felt this sort of hatred for the sex worker and people like her. Dude, I understand feeling pissed and embarrassed that this woman got to keep your extra £5, but I feel like the level of anger and hatred and then hating all sex workers is going a little far. To me, it seems like this man, if you can call him that, was going to go on to kill people regardless, and this was just kind of his excuse or reason to attack people in his own mind. Apparently, Peter would go on to see this same sex worker about 3 weeks later in a pub called Lum Lane. Peter said when he went up to the woman saying that he remembered the incident from before and that she could make it right with him, and he would have no hard feelings, he stated that he was trying to give her the opportunity to make the situation right and give him back his payment, but that she thought it was a joke and had known so many people in the pub that evening that she went around telling them all, and he said before he knew it, all of the people in the bar were laughing at him. I know the situation seems shitty, but first off, this man goes on to be one of the biggest pieces of shit that I have ever heard of, so I don't feel bad for him in the least. And secondly, it seems like he gets himself into these situations instead of just letting things go. When he saw her that night, he could have just ignored her, he could have left, he could have even just told her that he was upset and left it at that. I have to ask, dude, what did you think was going to happen when you walk up to this woman and tell her to pay you back and make it right? To me, even though the situation sucked, he should have just left it alone. But nope, he felt that he had an injustice done to him and had to make a big deal out of it. Not long after this, in September of 1969, Peter would go on to make his first attack. It was said somewhere between a week and a month after he had approached that sex worker at the pub asking for his money back, he would be with a friend named Trevor Birdsall sitting in Trevor's minivan. The two were sitting near St. Paul's Road, and I guess this is near the Manningham Park, Bradford. Peter was still looking for the sex worker who owed him money and who he had the problem with, but of course, until now, he had not found her. Dude, let it go. Holy shit. Apparently, this evening of sitting in the van, Peter suddenly got out of the van, walking up St. Paul's Road and out of sight of Trevor. I guess Peter came back about 10 minutes later, completely out of breath, and told Trevor to take off fast. As the pair were driving away towards Bingley, Peter said that he had followed a quote-unquote old cow to a house nearby and admitted that he had hit her on the back of the head with a rock inside of a sock. He then took the sock out of his pocket and then proceeded to dump whatever was inside out the window. Well, unfortunately for Peter, the very next day, some police officers showed up to Peter's house. It was said that when the woman who looked nothing like the sex worker who took his 10 pounds was able to see the license plate on Trevor's van, she reported it to the police. Peter then did admit that he hit the woman, but he said he only hit her with his hand. Okay, dude. I guess the police stood there scolding Peter, telling him how lucky he was that the woman didn't want to press charges for the assault. Later, during Peter's confessions, he would say that he felt out of his mind with obsession trying to find the sex worker who took his money, and while he was out with his friend Trevor looking for her, it was getting late. He then said he decided to take his anger and rage out on the first sex worker he saw. Oh, okay, so this poor woman is just minding her own business, looking for a client for her job, and you run up behind her and hit her in the back of the head with a rock inside of a sock? What the fuck, dude? The next attack and known second survivor of Peter's would be a woman named Anna Rogolski, and she would be attacked on July 5th, 1975. Anna was just 36 years old, and she had apparently met Peter twice before this third encounter. Peter apparently had been told that this particular area that he went to called Keeley is where he would find a ton of sex workers. Anna reported being approached by a man with, quote, dark hair and a springy beard while she was at the town hall square. Peter was said to have wanted to go home with Anna for a cup of tea. Apparently, Anna was scared and weirded out when Peter started following her to the street she lived on called Highfield Lane, where she would eventually be able to get him to leave. This was her first encounter with Peter. The second time was just a few weeks later, after the first time she had met him. Peter again followed Anna to a place called Wild's Coffee Bar, and this was in the center of town. Apparently, she had worked there before. Anna noticed Peter's, quote, racing eyes and dainty hands. He asked her if he could buy her a drink, but when he realized that she was about to make a scene because he wouldn't leave her alone, he bolted. Just a few weeks after the second encounter, which would be the night of the 4th of July, Peter was alone and drove to the center of the sex worker city that he had heard so much about, Keeley. Or Kaylee. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Anna had been out that night drinking and was taking the bus to Bradford when she was able to find a ride back to Keeley and then home. After this, she was headed to her boyfriend's house, who she had a tumultuous relationship with, but I guess he lived in a place on North Queen Street that was an almost abandoned area with lots of places being boarded up. While she was walking towards her boyfriend's home, she heard from the darkness a man in a doorway who asked her if she, quote, fancied it. I'm guessing he's asking her to either sleep with him or if she was a sex worker, he could pay. Her reply was amazing, as she said, quote, not on your life. And this is when she walked faster towards Jeff's house, who at the time was her boyfriend. She reached her boyfriend's house and was pounding on the door, but no one answered. She then became angry and broke one of the windows with her shoe. I thought it was going to say that she broke the window to get inside because she was scared of the guy who yelled at her, but nope, she just put her shoe through the window and then she left, unfortunately. She started heading back towards her house, and of course, as before, she was asked the exact same question from the exact same man, who she again turned down. Anna was only able to get a few paces away before Peter hit her in the head with a ball-peen hammer 3 times. When Anna fell to the ground, he raised her shirt up and slashed her across the stomach. And as he was about to stab her in the stomach as well, there was a man who called out after hearing the commotion. This was enough to scare Peter off, allowing Anna to keep her life. Around 2:20 a.m., Anna was found by another person walking by. She was then taken to a hospital in Airedale. From there, she was taken to Leeds General Infirmary. Anna was then taken into surgery and suffered through a 12-hour operation where the surgeons had to remove, quote, splinters of bone from her brain, end quote. About this attack, Peter would be quoted as saying, "I was certain she was a prostitute. Scum. I was being given instructions on what was the best moment to attack. I waited till she turned to walk back home. Then I hit her on the back of the head with the hammer. I knew it was the safest. I knew she wouldn't see me. It was all over in less than 10 seconds. I didn't mean for her to suffer. I meant her to die." End quote. This is just so friggin' chilling. Holy shit. He also said something to the tune of being disrupted when he was trying to kill her. The next woman was a survivor named Olive Smelt, who was 46 years old, and she was a cleaner of offices who was attacked by the Yorkshire Ripper, and this would take place on August 15th, 1975. Olive had been out drinking with some friends before heading home, but stopped at a place to grab a late dinner for herself and her husband, Harry, as well as her family. This was said to be a local fish and chips place. While Olive had been out at a pub called the Royal Oak, Peter and his pal Trevor had ended up at the same bar, where of course Peter would go on his same bullshit about sex workers. He would, for whatever reason, point out at Olive and told Trevor, quote, "I bet she's on the game." Peter was also said to have said something similar to Olive as she walked by, headed to the bathroom. I guess when he said his snide comment to her, Olive was said to have put him in his place, which I fucking love. Go Olive, hell yes. Right before the pub was about to close, Olive and her friend saw 2 men that they actually knew who offered the ladies a ride home. Olive and her friend took the ride, but Olive got out near her home on Boothtown Road, and this wouldn't be much farther of a walk to her house. On her little walk home, she was hoping to find a fish and chips place that would still be open at the time. This, of course, is where Peter and Trevor happened to be driving by and recognized her. When Peter stopped the vehicle, Trevor remembered that Peter had put his hand down by the side of his seat before hopping out and saying to Trevor that he was going to talk to somebody really quick. He ran around the back of the car, and Trevor said he didn't seem to go the same way that Olive was, when in fact Peter ran down the alley that ran parallel to the alleyway that Olive was walking on. When Peter caught up to Olive, he mentioned something about the weather to her while he passed her, and then within just a few short steps, he hit her on the head with the hammer twice. He was then able to make 2 large gashes above her butt that were like 6 or 8 inches long when a car started to come down the road with their headlights on, and this made Peter flee back to his own car, leaving Olive alive. It took Peter about 20 minutes from the time that he left the car to get back to it, with Trevor still sitting there, where Trevor would later say that Peter seemed unusually quiet and told Trevor that he was just talking to a woman. I had to wonder here if he had any blood on him after bashing Olive in the head with the hammer or slashing her back. You would think that he would have blood on him, right? After Olive was discovered in the alley, she was taken to Halifax Infirmary and then to Leeds Infirmary, and she ended up having brain surgery as well. She was able to describe her attacker from that evening as being about 30 years old, with a slight build, with a beard and dark hair. I don't know why, but hearing that this asshat had dainty hands and a slight build makes it so much better. Did he have some sort of complex that he felt he needed to show his masculinity over these women, whether they were or weren't sex workers? Ugh, I hate him. During his confessions, Peter admitted that Olive had probably annoyed him in some quote-unquote minor way, and that he wanted to kill her, but again was disturbed by a car. He would then go on to say, quote, "Consequently, I did it with Trevor still in the car. I knew it was my mission. I heard voices, echoes. Sometimes it was the voice, sometimes an echo, sometimes it was very clear, sometimes not." End quote. This was interesting, and this is the first time that I heard Peter say anything about voices telling him anything or on any kind of a mission. In this moment where I am in my research, I am unsure of any diagnoses that Peter may have. I will, of course, look into this further as we get further into the case because it's giving a familiar mental illness to me, but I'm not a psychologist, so until I know for sure, I will not share my thoughts on it. It is interesting, though, for sure. So this next victim is the last woman to survive before Peter would go on to murder his first victim. This woman's name is Tracy Brown, and she was only 14 years old when she would be attacked by Peter. Tracy would be attacked on August 27, 1975, around 10:30 p.m. on a farm road. Tracy had a twin sister named Mandy, and on the evening of the attack, the twins knew that they had a curfew of 10:30 p.m., and it was said that Mandy had actually left to head home before Tracy did. When Tracy was on her way home, she spotted a man walking on the road towards her. Tracy would say that this man, seemingly in his late 20s or early 30s, stopped to look at her before she was at some point on the road with him. She said he did eventually continue on walking, but did so very slowly as she was approaching him. And this is where I got a little confused, because somehow the pair ended up walking the same direction, but it was also said that she caught up to him. So I don't know how he started walking towards her, and then she caught up to him, and then they started walking the same direction. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there. But either way, they ended up walking the same direction, and they chatted a little bit about how there is nothing to do in the area. But Peter kept following behind her on the walk to either tie his shoes or blow his nose, which I'm guessing that he was going to hit her when he kept quote-unquote falling behind. Tracy was able to describe the man that she was walking next to and talking to during their meeting. Tracy would later on describe him as having, quote, a dark afro-style crinkly hair and beard, a knitted V-neck cardigan over a light blue open-necked shirt, with brown trousers and brown suede shoes, end quote. When the pair had walked far enough to reach Tracy's driveway, which was gated at her family's farm, Peter again had hung back a little. This time, he quickly attacked Tracy from behind, hitting her in the head with the hammer 5 times. While Tracy recalled telling Peter to quote-unquote, please don't, she remembers him making a grunting sound each time he struck her. I can only imagine that would be something that would stick with her for the rest of her life, to recall the noise that her attacker made each time he hit her in the head with a hammer. Poor thing, because that's absolutely awful. During the attack, Peter was interrupted again by a vehicle, and this is when Peter would throw Tracy over a fence before fleeing the area. While Tracy was completely covered in blood, she made her way to what was said to be a caravan that was parked about 400 yards from where she was attacked. While Tracy was in the hospital, she too would end up needing brain surgery and head surgery, and in an attempt to save her life, they also removed bone slivers from her brain. She did survive, thankfully, all of this happening to her at the age of 14. I cannot imagine. When Tracy did recover, she was able to give a good description of who attacked her, and of course this image was close to the real identity of her attacker, Peter Sutcliffe. She had described the man as having a thinner face, a beard, and a mustache, and described his eyes as staring. This, again, a common theme in people who end up becoming murderers, that their eyes are hollow or they're staring. We hear this a lot. After Tracy gave the information and description to the authorities, there was a witness who came forward who gave a similar description of the man that they had seen in the neighborhood that evening. The witness was also able to tell the authorities that they saw this man lingering outside near what they thought was a white Ford car. At the scene of Tracy's attack, the authorities were able to retrieve some physical evidence. They found a paper handkerchief and made the assumption that the attacker was suffering from hay fever, which was correct. They also found at the scene what they described to be as a quote-unquote hippie-style bracelet, and it was made of wooden beads. I guess after this attack, the detective who would end up being in charge of the Ripper investigation, named James Hobson, didn't believe that this attack was in connection to the Ripper case. At the time, they believed that Tracy had been attacked with a piece of wood, and since she was not a sex worker and the rest of the attacks had taken place inside the city areas, they didn't think that it was part of the case. There would also be around 200 police officers that would end up being on the Ripper case, but at this time, unfortunately, there wasn't much progress being made on the case. Tracy, however, was convinced that the Ripper was the man who attacked her, and of course now we know she was right. I guess it was said that after she was attacked, she would go on to see a sketch of what the Ripper was believed to look like. Tracy would end up going to the Keighley police station with her mother, but apparently the, quote, young constable laughed at their suggest that the man who attacked her was the Ripper, end quote. What the fuck, man? Tracy's mother would go on in an interview later on to say that if the police had taken Tracy seriously and released the sketch that she was able to help provide, that some of the victims of the Ripper would be alive to this day. She's not wrong. The police seemed to have botched this investigation so far, and to laugh at a 14-year-old and her mother after this poor little girl was attacked is repulsive. Later on, Tracy's case would be linked to the Ripper after a man named Mr. Colin Sampson was reviewing the case, and this would be the man who would be the next West Yorkshire Chief Constable. I guess at first Peter would not take responsibility for this attack and was challenging the authorities to prove it. I wonder if he knew because of her young age that the other men in the prison wouldn't take kindly to his actions. There is such thing as a prison hierarchy. Later on, though, Peter would admit to being responsible for the attack on poor Tracy. Most of Peter's crimes would be committed between 1975 and 1980. Wilma McCann was a 28-year-old woman and mother of 4 children. Wilma would leave her house around 7:30 p.m., leaving the oldest child, who was aged 9, in charge when she left on October 30th, 1975. She would head out from her, quote, council house on Scott Hall Avenue in Chapeltown area of Leeds, walk past the nearby Prince Philip playing fields, and headed for the pubs and clubs, end quote. Now, I am not victim shaming here because it was a different time back then, and what the hell do I know, but I do feel like leaving a 9-year-old in charge of 3 other kids is a little young, no? That makes me sad. At first I thought, well, if she's a sex worker and she has to work at night, right? So she's just doing the best she can to provide for her children, then there's really nothing I can say about it. You gotta do what you gotta do. But after reading a little bit into this, I'm not quite sure if she was in search of work or if she just went out drinking and found someone willing to pay, then maybe she would work. It's just a little bit unclear, but I will say that those poor babies losing their mother so young breaks my heart. So Wilma would be out that night drinking beer and whiskey and was said to have been seen at the Scotman, the Regent, the Royal Oak, and the White Swan, which without context, I'm assuming that these are pubs, and can I just say that I love the names of these establishments? They sound so fancy and old-timey. I love it. Apparently, the pubs in this area had a closing time of 10:30 on weekdays, which is now like so early. I know bars stay open much later than that now. It's nuts. Wilma had ended her evening at the Room at the Top, which was a quote-unquote drinking club, which must stay open later than regular pubs because it was said that Wilma wouldn't leave this nightclub until around 1 a.m. She was said to be carrying with her a, quote, container of curry and chips and worse for drink, end quote. I think that's a way of saying that she was drunk, and I love it. I wish I spoke like this because it makes everything sound so much better than we do here in America. She was worse for drink? Yes, please. Love it. It was then stated in this source that the blood samples that would be taken from her body after her death from a professor named David Gee would go on to reveal that Wilma had actually consumed, quote, 12 to 14 measures of spirits in the few hours prior to her death, end quote. I'm assuming here that measures of spirits means drinks, like the number of drinks that she had before her untimely death. Wilma was said to only have a short walk back to her house from the Room at the Top. Apparently she had staggered in and out of traffic, hoping that someone would give her a ride home, which is scary when you're intoxicated like that and in traffic. I hate that for her. Wilma was said then to have been able to flag down a lorry, which I had to look up, and this is what they, I guess, call a semi-truck. When the truck pulled over, the driver was said to be greeted with a mixture of incoherent abuse and instructions. At this point, the driver decided not to give her a ride and drove off. Unfortunately, Peter Sutcliffe was driving in Leeds at the time in his vehicle, which was said to be a lime green Ford Capri GT. The man would go on to have a few different vehicles. I think he had a red one, a white one, both Fords, different cars. So you'll hear different descriptions of vehicles. Just know that they're actually all his. But this green Ford Capri, inconspicuous man. What an idiot. Although I'm glad he's a moron, lime green isn't that stealthy, man. Peter had consumed a few drinks on his own before he spotted Wilma with her thumb out looking for a ride home. Peter pulled over and Wilma jumped into the car. Right before they drove off, Wilma asked Peter if he quote-unquote wanted business. Apparently when Peter asked what she meant because he didn't understand, Wilma, quote, said in a scornful voice, "Bloody hell, do I have to spell it out?" End quote. After driving off, the pair would end up parked near the Prince Philip playing fields, and this was only said to be about 100 yards from her own home, which for some reason just kills me that she was this close to home and still ended up being killed. When the two were in the car, Wilma would say, quote, "Well, what are you waiting for? Let's get on with it." And then told Peter it would cost a $5, aka 5 pounds. I guess Peter at this time was surprised at her comments and this situation because in his mind, he thought it would be more romantic and couldn't just be aroused to have sex in a matter of seconds. This is when Wilma would sadly become abusive and then threatened him with leaving. I wish that she would have just gone home. Peter then suggested that the pair have sex in the grass, and I guess Wilma angrily stomped up the hill. Peter said he then laid his coat onto the grass for them, all the while he was concealing a hammer in his right hand. When Wilma sat down on the coat and unbuttoned her pants, she told him to get it over with, to which Peter replied and told her not to worry, that he would. This is when Peter would strike Wilma numerous times with a hammer. The next morning around 7:41 a.m., Wilma's body would be discovered by a milkman whose name was Alan Rutledge, and in tow he had his 10-year-old little brother named Paul. It was said at first Alan thought it was just a homeless man or maybe even a bundle of rags. Unfortunately, his little brother would be the one that figured out that this was a body. This kills me that a 10-year-old little boy and his brother had to find this woman at all, but especially in this state, it's a little graphic. Wilma was discovered dead, laying on her back, her bra lifted, exposing her breasts, and her pants were found down around her knees. She was described as having strawberry blonde hair covered and caked in blood. Wilma had also been stabbed a total of 15 times in her chest, neck, and lower neck. This would be the first victim of what would later be known as the Yorkshire Ripper. I don't know what it is for me, but when a victim is described, and unfortunately you hear this a lot, but when they're found with their quote-unquote, like their pants around their knees or pulled down, it gives me such an icky feeling. Like, obviously this whole thing is absolutely horrific, but something always strikes me with the worst feeling when the victims are described like this. There's just something so violating and without their dignity like this that makes me so infuriated for them. Not that killing someone and then covering them back up is any better by any means, but there have been some killers that just leave them like this without any regard or thought to how they would be found, and that makes it feel like the killer is just this person who thinks that they are less than human or trash, and I hate it. Or when you hear like the killer poses the bodies, it's just so beyond comprehension that they would be so proud of their horrific acts that they actually want people to see what they have done. Ugh, yuck, people suck. So Peter Sutcliffe during his confessions would go on to talk about his victims. About his first victim, Wilma, Peter would go on to say, quote, "After the first time, I developed and played up a hatred for prostitutes in order to justify within myself a reason why I attacked and killed Wilma McCann." End quote. I've heard this many times in true crime where either the police don't investigate the murders of sex workers as much as they should back in that time, or a little bit, still now, or the perpetrators will prey on people who they believe society or people around will think of these people are like less dead. It blows my mind that this still happens sometimes, where people who are unfortunately addicts or sex workers, that their murders aren't treated the same because of their vices or job description. Sex workers are people, period. What they do for their job, in my opinion, is none of our business. And regardless of someone's job or problems with addiction, no one deserves to be murdered. These are human beings with parents, siblings, cousins, or children of their own. And they deserve to be treated with respect and their deaths investigated as such as well. In Peter's confessions, he would later explain the interaction between Wilma and himself the night of her murder. After Peter said he had thought that the interaction of the sex worker would be more quote-unquote romantic, he gave what he thought was his justification or explanation of his actions. Peter said, quote, "At this point, she opened the car door and got out. She slammed the door and shouted, 'I'm going. It's going to take you all fucking day.' She shouted something like, 'You're fucking useless,'" end quote. Peter then went on to explain that he felt himself become enraged. He explained that he got out of the car, wanting to get back at her for insulting him, and then he was wanting to hit her for it. I can understand being upset if someone calls you useless or whatever, or challenging your manhood or whatever, but to lose your shit and use violence or physical assault or murder? No. That is a ridiculous excuse for such a heinous act. Nothing this woman could have said or did could warrant such rage from you. That's a you problem, not a her problem. He could have been pissed and just as easily drove off and dealt with his shit. When Peter said he told Wilma not to take off the way that she did, she had only been a few steps out in front of him and had turned around to face him. He stated that she said something to the tune of, "Oh, you can fucking manage it now, can you?" And then Peter said, "She sounded as though she was taunting me," end quote. Again, I say that I can understand having your feelings hurt or getting pissed at her comments, but it's still not an excuse to hurt her. You can leave. You can yell something nasty back if you really need to get that anger out. We would all love to be better people than we are, but sometimes people push the right buttons and we're not our best selves, and those not great selves come out. Usually in our anger, and that's okay too if you aren't hurting someone or screaming slurs or something. Look, I'm not saying that it's alright to go around screaming at people who make you mad or anything, please don't do that. But I'm being honest in the fact that sometimes when the taunting hits a button of ours, it's easy to understand the feelings of anger. In our worst moments in life, we all feel anger, and that sucks, but anger's a normal human reaction or feeling. What is not normal or okay is to physically hurt or assault someone no matter what they say, period. When the pair exchanged more words about not wanting to do it in the grass next to the car, Wilma made her way up the hill, and this is when Peter would grab the hammer out of his toolbox in the back seat. This next description part of the murder is a little graphic, so if you need to skip a few seconds because it's not for you, there's no shame. Peter would then confess, quote, "I hit her with the hammer on the head. I was stood up at that time behind her. I think I hit her on top of the head. I hit her once or twice on the head. She fell down flat on her back and started making a horrible noise, like a moaning, gurgling noise," end quote. Yeah, the noise is probably awful after your head gets bashed in with a hammer, you piece of shit. He then spouted some shit about knowing that he went too far and asking himself what he had just done. I don't believe him for a second. He then stated that he took off towards his car and was wanting to drive away when he said that he could see her arm was still moving. He then put the hammer back in the toolbox, claiming to be numb with panic. He then went on to say that he kind of thought she was going to get back up and realized that if she did, he would end up getting into trouble. Peter then thought to himself what would be the best way to get out of this mess, and this is when he wanted to just make sure that Wilma wouldn't be able to tell anyone. He said he grabbed the knife from his toolbox and commented that the knife had a wooden handle and that the blade was approximately about 7 inches long and about 1/2 to 3/4 inches wide. So a big fucking knife. Peter then said he went back to Wilma on the hill and she was still laying on her back. He then said, quote, "To make certain she was dead, I would stab her in places like the lungs and the throat. I stabbed her at least 4 times, once in the throat. Before I stabbed her in the body, I pulled her blouse or whatever it was and her bra so I could see where I was stabbing her. I was in a blind panic when I was stabbing her, just to make sure she wouldn't tell anyone," end quote. This is just my opinion, but I think this dude is absolutely full of shit. Now, I have told you guys before that I script out while I research so that I can learn the case right alongside of you so that my reactions are in real time and so are my thoughts. I don't believe for 1 second that he pulled her shirt or her bra up so that he could see where he was stabbing her. Like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. If you bashed her in the head already and then you went back with a knife to make sure that you finished the job, including stabbing her in the throat, there is no way in hell that you were going to pull up her clothes so you could quote-unquote see where you're stabbing her. The whole time that he was giving his little story, I was thinking to myself that he had confessed that she had unbuttoned her pants when she sat down on the coat, but never said a word about pulling down her pants or lifting her shirt. According to his confession, it didn't even get that far before he started hitting her. So when it was reported that these 2 young poor boys had found her with her shirt and bra pulled up and her pants pulled down, how the hell did they get that way? Like, I understand in his confession that he's saying that he just pulled them up to see where he was stabbing her, but why were her pants pulled down then? And then it made me wonder, did he rape her, or was he going to rape her? Or did he just get some sexual pleasure in seeing her body as he stabbed her? I just don't believe him for a second, and I'm wondering maybe he did rape her. Was she alive when he raped her? Is he a necrophiliac? I don't know. He would then try to go on to explain that he was stupid for doing this, and that if he had been thinking logically, he should have pulled over and told someone that he had hit her with a hammer. In no world do I believe that he would have actually done this. I actually don't, in my own opinion, don't even think that he went back to the car to quote-unquote drive away. It seems to me that this man knew exactly what he was doing and had been escalating for a while. I mean, as we've heard before, he already tried to kill a few women. So I think that he just went back to the car with the sole intention of grabbing a knife to finish her off. Again, this is just conjecture, but Peter went on to say that when he had finished stabbing her, he headed back to his car and then remembered that he had left his coat up there with Wilma, grabbed his coat, and drove away from Leeds immediately. He then said that he went home, washed his hands, and went to bed. Peter said he no longer had the clothes that he was wearing that night and that he can't remember what he did with the hammer or the knife he used, but he did say that he may still have the hammer in his toolbox. And that is where we are going to end for part 1 of the Yorkshire Ripper. Woo! What a case, right? Peter Sutcliffe, as you can see, is one of the most horrific and brutal serial killers I have personally ever heard of, and it's only going to get worse. It is crazy to me that the events that led up to his killing spree are what they were. I'm so happy that there were survivors of his attack who were able to live to tell their tale. I can't even imagine for those poor victims who lived what life would be like after he attacked them. I imagine that it would be so hard to ever recover from something like that. I hope that these women who survived were able to find some sort of peace and happiness in their lives because they deserve that. So next week, we are going to delve into part 2 of the Yorkshire Ripper series, where we are going to cover more of Peter Sutcliffe's victims and their stories, as well as go over more details of his vicious attacks. I hope that you guys will come back next week for the next episode, and of course, eventually we know that this man will go on to be caught, and we will get some sort of a resolution in this case, which will help us feel a little better that hopefully justice will be served for his victims. I believe that there were 25 attacks in all that were connected to the Yorkshire Ripper, and we were able to cover 5 of them in this episode. So yes, this is a huge case, and we will be covering all of the victims, so however many parts this ends up being, we shall see. I'm just not going to leave anyone's story out, and I don't want to leave any details out for you guys. Like, if we're going to do it, let's do it right. And I also find that deep dives like this are interesting, where we really get to know the victims and this sicko who committed these heinous crimes. I hope that you guys will agree. Until next week, my friends, stay safe. Bye. Well, that's it for today, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and listening to another episode of The Kill File. Don't forget to check out the merch shop, either at thekillfile.com and click Shop Merch, or you can visit thekillfile.printify.me/products for some awesome true crime merch. Also, follow along on the Kill File socials for posts about episodes, pictures about the cases, for updates, and more. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X as The Kill File, and we are on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out the website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host. You can learn a little bit more about how the Kill File got started, and you can suggest a case right there on the website. Let me know in your case suggestion if you want me to shout out your name if I cover your case. There is contact info on the site as well. You guys have no idea how much I love to hear from you. It makes my whole day. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on the Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.